Hello and welcome into the Lockdown Wolves podcast. We are live on the POSTCAST following the Timberwolves' loss to the Detroit Pistons. Marney Gellner of Valley Sports North joins the show to break down the loss. The Lockdown Wolves POSTCAST starts right now.
You are Locked On Wolves POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Wolves podcast, part of the Lockdown Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Lockdown Wolves. Marney Gellner of Valley Sports North is with me to break down the Timberwolves' loss to the Pistons. And Marney, here we are again. It's another demoralizing loss to the Pistons. And this time, Detroit was shorthanded, missing Marvin Bagley, who had a double-double against the Wolves last time out, missing Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, plenty of rotation guys missing for the Pistons. And it really feels like the Wolves kind of took a half step forward over the last week or so, and now yet another gigantic step backwards.
Yeah, this was really disappointing. And to be fair, the Wolves were also shorthanded still without the guys that have been hurt, your Karl Anthony Towns, your Jordan McLaughlin. But Kyle Anderson was another guy who we've come to rely on in the starting lineup, was a late scratch because of an illness. So I guess both teams were kind of evenly shorthanded, but that is not an excuse, and this Timberwolves team should not have lost to Detroit, and it was a 17-point loss. And this time I feel like the Wolves were ready to play out of the chute, whereas in Houston it took at least a half to get going. The Wolves just shot out of the gate and were up 10-0. But again, it almost felt like they kind of took the attitude of well, we clocked in and now we just have to clock out. Work is done. It's Detroit. And as we saw for the second time in a couple of weeks, the last time being New Year's Eve, you give this team a little hope. And guess what? The guys out there are trying to win. And this was a terrible loss for the Wolves to give up 135 points and allow 60% field goal shooting. Terrible loss.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, like we've talked about this a little bit before, but the Wolves, the biggest issue so far this year, more broadly speaking, and specific to this game, yes, but also broadly, has been the consistent effort. And these teams that are not good teams on paper, they, like you said, they at this point are looking at the Wolves on the schedule and saying, oh, if we play hard, we can pick up a win here. And even if the front office is, potentially tanking or whatever, the guys on the floor are trying to win. And if one team's trying and the other team's not, these guys are all still pro basketball players. And it's going to at least make these games close, as we saw on Sunday. The Wolves ended up winning against Houston because they had such a significant talent advantage and played well in the, at times of the second half and everything like that. But in this game, the Wolves had a slight lead at the end of the first quarter. The second quarter is when things really started to turn. And then the third quarter, those typical third quarter woes were back. The Wolves gave up 36 points to the Pistons in the third quarter, 135 points to the Detroit Pistons in this game. And this is a team that, depending on where you look, was anywhere from 27th to 29th in defensive rating coming in. And as you said, they shot 60% from the field. For my money, the biggest issue in this game was point of attack defense, just putting pressure on the ball. It was just straight line drive after straight line drive, really throughout the game, but especially kind of second and third quarter, which is what really did the Wolves in.
And Chris Finch mentioned that too. After the game, he was really frustrated with the defense, and he pointed out just that point of attack defense, but then he also added that, well, then it became the secondary defense, and then it became the rim defense, and then it was everybody everywhere. He did not give a pass to any player, nor should he. And I'm wondering, I was a little confused as to why Anthony Edwards especially was playing at the end of that game, but so was D'Angelo Russell and Austin Rivers, who had been a starter. And I felt like it was one of those lessons, and it had happened early in the season too, where it was kind of like, you made this mess and you got to sit in it for a little bit. It sucks. It's uncomfortable. Nobody likes it. It's not fun, but you learn a lot from having to work to clean up your own mess. And after the game, Chris Hine of the Star Tribune is really the only beat writer who, guys that ask the tough questions, who would be asking that. And he did ask Chris Finch about Anthony Edwards playing, but I think Finch thought he meant just in general coming back after he was ruled out for the rest of the game. Chris Hine asked about playing when we're down by 20 or when the Wolves are down by 20. Did you think about pulling him out? And Finch just said, well, I guess you can stay in. And so he misunderstood the question, and Chris Hine didn't follow up on it, which I was a little disappointed with, because I was like, why is Anthony Edwards in this game? This man is hurt. But so to get back to your point of overall defense and point of attack defense, usually point of attack falls on the point guards or whoever is guarding, or the backcourt, whoever's guarding the person bringing up the ball. And D'Angelo Russell did not have a great defensive night by any means. And I'm wondering if that was one of the reasons he was still in the game when the Wolves were down by 20 in the final couple of minutes. But nobody gets a pass on defense tonight after this one.
No, I agree. It was bad across the board, and Bojan Bogdanovic had his way against the Wolves, especially I think it was third quarter the first time the Wolves played the Pistons, and that happened again. And Jaden McDaniels started out pretty well against him early in the game, but as the game wore on, Bogdanovic got whatever he wanted, and the Pistons do a lot to get him. They run actions to get him catch and shoot opportunities, coming around screens, etc. And he's a great shooter. So McDaniels did okay against him, but the point of attack thing is the biggest issue, and that often was D'Angelo Russell, sometimes an injured Anthony Edwards, sometimes Austin Rivers, who I think again early in the game was active defensively, and then as the game wore on, it's I don't know what it is, but middle of the game, second, third quarter, it's like it was just Olay defense. And back to Anthony Edwards, I think he it almost feels, and I don't know, but the team announced at halftime or around halftime, just after halftime, that he was out for the rest of the game, and then shortly thereafter they were saying, well, he's available again. And who knows, it really felt like he saw the way the game was going and was like, let me get in there. And yeah, he scored some points when he came back in, but he didn't look like himself. He had a couple uncharacteristic turnovers. And I mean, they weren't playing, as we said, they weren't playing well defensively anyway. And that continued after he came back in the game. But yeah, point of attack defense across the board. Ant's injury. This is another game. You mentioned Kyle Anderson off the top. And I think this is a game where he would have made a huge difference. Just kind of calming the team down. And the Wolves pretty much, other than the third quarter, were fine offensively. But Anderson's the glue guy on both ends of the floor. He's kind of the guy that holds that defense together sometimes, both a good individual and a good team defender, and it really hurts to not have him out there.
And I don't think we really understood the impact he can make on this team until we were a good few weeks into the season, because remember, he missed a significant amount of games early on in the first month or so with back spasms. And even when he did play, it was small minutes, and he didn't really get the full Kyle Anderson until probably, almost December, maybe mid-November. But then we saw as he starts to sort of get his fingerprints all over the game and influence Anthony Edwards on offense and defense and give you decent stat lines and leadership and defense that doesn't show up in the box score, that's when you go, oh, this is why they wanted a guy like Kyle Anderson. Because you're right, Ben, he calms the team down when it needs to be calmed down. He gets you in the right positions on offense, and it holds you accountable on defense. And it's all those things that when a team gets discombobulated, like the Wolves very much were tonight, they were just out of sorts. It was like, what are we doing? We can't even make passes right now in the backcourt. It was just, it all just unraveled so quickly. And they needed a calming presence like Kyle Anderson. And Taurean Prince can be that guy as well, but TP hurt his ankle and was out for a minute and then came back and it was taped up and he was kind of fidgeting with it. So I feel like he was a little bit preoccupied and not quite himself because he wasn't at 100%. So Kyle Anderson was missed tonight.
Let's talk about our title sponsors of tonight's postcast. That's our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every pro and amateur league out there, from pro football to college football when it's in season, both college and pro basketball. Any sport that you want to find, you can find it at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline too. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. You pick your category in the box score, and the Timberwolves probably lost it in this game. I think fast break points were one that hurt them early, and it didn't matter as much late. They lost that. The Timberwolves had 2 fast break points in this game, which is obviously miserable. A team that's trying to play fast, the Wolves are. They barely won points in the paint. They turned the ball over more than Detroit. They obviously shot the ball much worse than Detroit. Detroit shot 60% from the field. Detroit was over 50% from three in this game. There just wasn't a whole lot of defense, period. I mean, Detroit didn't play great defense either. They're not a very good defensive team at all. But this was just kind of an all-around disappointing effort performance. And I don't even know that there's anything like, scheme-wise, this is one of those, remember a couple of weeks ago, Rudy Gobert said something like, oh, we actually, we played hard. We got back in transition. We didn't turn the ball over, so we were able to execute the game plan. It's not even really clear what the game plan was supposed to be in this game because they just got behind the eight ball so quickly in so many of these other areas. The Timberwolves bench really struggled in this game. And Finch went deeper, no Kyle Anderson. And obviously the guys that have been out were still missing, and Prince got banged up early, but we saw Bryn Forbes in the first half. We saw Nate Knight in the first half, and the bench as a whole just didn't perform very well either.
And Jalen Noel was in there, and he's just kind of been in an overall rut.
Yep.
The last month or so. The shooting, I mean, Detroit, that was a season high for the Pistons for percentage from 53%, and 60% from the game. And in the second half, 67%. So not just a quarter, but the entire second half average for Detroit from the floor was 67%. And that's when the Wolves are trying to get back in that. It's not like they're up 25 and they can take 5 minutes off and still be fine. This was Wolves trying to win the game and allowing that to a team that had 11 wins. Detroit had 5 home wins coming into that game and 11 total wins. And now they have 2 of those wins over the Timberwolves in the span of a week and a half.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention...
just frustrating.
Yeah, we didn't even mention this. They were on the second night of a back-to-back. They got beat by 30 in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
they traveled, too.
Yeah, they lost by 31 in Philly, and the Wolves played Sunday in Houston, did not play Monday or Tuesday. So the effort and energy just is inexcusable.
Yeah. I don't know what else we say about Detroit. I mean, thankfully the Timberwolves don't have to say. I never thought I'd say this, but they don't have to play the Pistons again this year. So, and it makes it that much more frustrating because they had won 4 in a row. As I said earlier, it feels like a half step forward and then wham, another full step back. But then you take on 2 of the next 3 games are against teams that are in a similar place in the Western Conference standings. Phoenix Friday, then Cleveland Saturday on a back-to-back, and then Utah Monday. Both Phoenix and Utah hovering around 500. And could be teams that the Timberwolves end up, battling with playoff positioning for at this point. I mean, who knows? But those are important games. And of course, these bad losses add up too at the end of the season. We'll look back and, if they win, say they finish at 500 and they're in the play-in or they miss the play-in or something, we're going to look back at these Detroit games and a couple of others, San Antonio, some of these other bad losses and really scratch our heads and say what could have been. But I mean, they have a couple days to get it back together. They come home to face Phoenix on Friday, and we'll see what Timberwolves team shows up.
And it's a really important game because we've said this before that the Wolves dropping so many games early, they just can't afford to not win games they should win. They have to pick up wins wherever and whenever they can. And now that you just drop another one to Detroit, you just don't have time to mess around like this. And the West is so close. I think going into this game, the Wolves were 2 games out of 4th or something ridiculous. Yeah. But that's looking up and you're like, wow, we're so close. There's a chance. But you got to be careful because if you look down, they're like the Lakers are on your heels and these teams that also are not out of it. I mean, that's the other bad side about having the West so bunched up is that they're also right on your backside. So you just can't afford to be dropping games against a really beat up, suffering Phoenix Suns team on Friday. That becomes a really important game.
Yeah, it's very weird. I mean, we're at the exact midpoint of the season pretty much. And I mean, you could tell me the Wolves finish anywhere from 6th to 12th in the West. And you could make that case. So there's a lot of season left. And obviously games like this feels like a real step in the wrong direction, but there's still a lot of time. So we'll go live after the Phoenix game Friday, as we always do. About 45 minutes after the game, we do this on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube page live, and then you can listen to it after the fact on any of the audio channels at the Locked On Wolves feed. A big thank you for listening, a big thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.